An Arctic front crashed over Bozeman without warning, burying the fields in white and driving the temperature below zero. In that storm, a tall, exhausted woman stumbled through the drifts, clutching a 10-week-old German Shepherd puppy to her chest, as if the small body was the only warmth left in her life. She wasn't just running from the cold. She was running from a powerful man who claimed the dog as property. A few miles away, a retired Marine patrolled his quiet ranch with his seasoned canine, a man who believed he had left conflict behind him. Then the dog stopped. One sharp bark pierced the wind. What he discovered in the snow would pull him back into a battle he thought was over, one involving lies, contracts, and a past mission that never sat right. Stay with this story. It's not just about survival. It's about truth coming to light. Before we begin, tell us where you're listening from, and subscribe for more stories of courage, loyalty, and faith. By dusk, the sky over Bozeman had sealed itself in iron-gray silence, and the wind moved across the open fields like something hunting. The Arctic front had arrived faster than forecast, dragging the temperature down to 12 degrees below 0 Celsius, and sweeping Highway 191 into a blur of white. Snow erased fence posts, swallowed tire tracks, and flattened distance until the land looked endless and unforgiving. In that white expanse, a single figure moved unevenly across a frozen field. Sarah Whitman was 29, 5'7", but made to look smaller by the way she folded inward against the cold. She was tall and narrow-shouldered, her frame naturally slim but thinned further by weeks of restless sleep. Strands of dark blonde hair, almost ash in winter light, escaped from beneath a soaked knit cap and stuck to her pale skin. Her face carried a softness that might once have been called gentle, but tonight it was sharpened by exhaustion. High cheekbones flushed red from windburn, lips cracked, eyes a washed gray blue that had not fully blinked away fear in hours. She held a 10-week-old German Shepherd puppy tight against her chest inside her coat. The puppy, Luna, had oversized paws and a thick sable coat already hinting at the powerful dog she would become. One ear stood straight while the other still folded at the tip, giving her an uneven, earnest look. Luna trembled, but not from panic. She was trying to burrow deeper into Sarah's warmth, trusting without understanding the danger. Sarah had been walking for nearly 6 hours. Each step felt like stepping through resistance. She had left before sunset, telling herself she would only go as far as the tree line, but fear had pushed her farther than reason. The cold bit through denim and thin fabric, but the greater ache lived inside her chest. She did not look back toward town. Looking back meant doubt. Doubt meant stopping, and stopping meant someone might catch up. A few miles away, beyond a long dirt road bordered by barbed wire and half-buried fence posts, Daniel Hayes moved steadily along the northern boundary of his ranch. Daniel was 45, broad-shouldered and built like a man who had never allowed softness to take root. His face was angular, jaw square and defined, nose slightly crooked from a break long healed without complaint. A short, disciplined beard framed his mouth, dark brown streaked with early gray, matching the faint silver threading his temples. A thin scar cut through his right eyebrow, pale against weathered skin. Years in the Marine Corps had shaped his posture into something permanently alert. He stood straight, even when alone. People in town described him as reserved, polite but distant. 8 years earlier, a failed overseas operation had cost him 2 men under his command. Since returning, he had chosen isolation over explanation. Silence, he had learned, demanded less from him than conversation. At his side moved Rex, a 7-year-old retired K9 German Shepherd with a powerful chest and dense black and tan coat dusted white by snow. Rex's amber eyes were sharp and thoughtful. He was the kind of dog who studied before acting. His left ear bore a small notch from old service work. Even in retirement, his gait remained purposeful, never drifting too far from Daniel. Loyalty had not been trained out of him. The wind shifted. Rex slowed first. His nose lifted, nostrils flaring against the cold. His body angled toward the far tree line beyond the fence. Daniel noticed immediately. Rex did not waste energy on ghosts. "What is it?" Daniel muttered, his voice rough from disuse. Rex took 3 deliberate steps forward, then stopped, tail stiff, ears locked ahead. Daniel felt the familiar tightening along his spine, the instinct that had kept him alive overseas. He moved past the fence line, boots breaking crusted snow. At first, he saw nothing but white distortion. Then, a darker shape stumbled near the edge of the field. Sarah's knees buckled just as Daniel reached her. He caught her before she fully collapsed, feeling the unnatural stiffness in her hands through his gloves. Her skin was cold, but not frozen. Her eyes were open, alert, scanning, not delirious. Luna whimpered softly, pressing into Daniel's coat without fear. Up close, Daniel saw how young Sarah truly was. Not fragile, no. There was stubbornness in the way her jaw set even through shivering, but worn thin by strain. "You're hypothermic," he said calmly. His tone carried no panic, only assessment. "I'm fine," she insisted, though her teeth chattered. The words came out brittle. Daniel did not argue. He guided her toward the secondary barn where a portable propane heater hummed for livestock emergencies. He sat her on a bale of hay, checked her pulse at her wrist, then wrapped a wool blanket around both her and the puppy. Rex positioned himself close enough to lend warmth without crowding her. Luna stopped trembling once enclosed by heat and fur. Daniel pulled out his phone. "I'm calling emergency services. They'll send a medic." The reaction was immediate. Sarah's hand shot out, gripping his sleeve with surprising strength. Fear flashed sharp in her eyes. "Please don't call them. I'm not missing. I left." Her voice cracked, but her gaze held steady. This was not confusion. It was intent. Daniel studied her for a long moment. He had seen fear before, the chaotic, panicked kind. This was different, controlled, protective. He slid the phone back into his pocket without comment. "You'll warm up first," he said simply. He did not ask why she left. He did not press. He waited until her breathing steadied and color returned faintly to her cheeks. Only then did he step into the barn office and turn on the small civilian police scanner mounted above his workbench, a habit from long nights alone when silence grew too heavy. Static crackled. Then a clear transmission cut through the noise. "Bozeman PD requests welfare check for Sarah Whitman. Reported unstable and possibly armed with stolen canine property." Daniel did not react outwardly, but in the doorway he glanced back at the young woman wrapped around the trembling puppy, and for the first time that night, something inside him shifted from caution to decision. Morning did not bring mercy. The storm had thinned into a hard, glassy cold that froze the ranch road solid, sealing Daniel's property in a silence that felt deliberate. Snow clung to the fence lines like bleached bone. Inside the secondary barn, the heater hummed steadily while pale light filtered through high windows. Sarah had slept in short, fractured intervals on a cot Daniel dragged from storage. When she woke, her movements were careful but steadier. Color had returned faintly to her narrow face, though exhaustion still pooled beneath her gray-blue eyes. Daniel watched her from the doorway before speaking, assessing posture, balance, clarity of gaze. He had seen shock before. This was not shock. This was a woman braced for pursuit. He finally brought her into the main cabin once he was satisfied her body temperature had stabilized. The cabin was modest but precise, everything in its place. Daniel believed in order the way other men believed in luck. A wood stove anchored the room. Tools lined one wall. A long oak table bore knife marks and years of quiet meals. Sarah stood near the doorway at first, tall but folded inward, as if uncertain she was allowed to take up space. Luna, revived by warmth, wriggled free from her coat and patted across the worn floorboards on oversized paws. The puppy's coat glowed rich sable in daylight, black saddle deepening across her back, muzzle darker than the rest. Her curiosity was immediate and unfiltered. She sniffed at Rex, who regarded her with measured calm. Rex lowered his massive head slightly, amber eyes thoughtful, and after a long moment, allowed Luna to nudge his chest. That acceptance was not casual. Rex did not extend trust without calculation. Daniel poured black coffee into a heavy ceramic mug and handed Sarah water instead. "Tell me," he said simply, not as command, but invitation. Sarah sat at the table, fingers laced tight enough to whiten her knuckles. In daylight, she appeared younger than the accusation broadcast over the scanner had suggested. Her skin was pale, with faint freckles scattered across the bridge of her nose. Her hair, once tied back neatly for work, now fell loose around her shoulders in uneven strands. When she spoke, her voice carried steadiness beneath fatigue. She had worked for nearly 4 years at Caldwell Protection and Canine Training, a private facility on the outskirts of Bozeman specializing in high-end security dogs. At first, she said, she believed in the mission. She had studied animal behavior in community college before financial strain forced her to leave. Dogs made sense to her. They responded to consistency. They did not manipulate. She had thought she was building something meaningful. The owner, Mark Caldwell, had hired her personally. She described him with restrained clarity. 52 years old, tall and broad through the chest, graying hair kept trimmed close, beard always shaped with deliberate precision. His eyes were a pale, assessing blue that rarely softened. Former private military contractor, known for discipline and results. "He doesn't raise his voice much," she said. "He doesn't need to." There was something in the way she said that, which hinted at experience rather than rumor. Over time, Sarah had begun noticing discrepancies. Dogs labeled as fully certified were not passing endurance drills. Training logs were altered after evaluations. Video footage was edited before submission to clients. Luna's litter had been advertised as descended from a decorated military canine line, increasing their market value dramatically. But Sarah had witnessed harsh conditioning methods applied to older dogs when performance lagged. "He calls it efficiency," she said quietly. "He says contracts don't pay for sentiment." Daniel listened without interruption, his posture still, elbows resting lightly on the table. 8 years earlier, he had relied on a canine unit in a foreign desert where terrain swallowed visibility and trust in data meant survival. He remembered the briefing, precise metrics, flawless reliability percentages. 2 men under his command had believed those numbers. He kept that thought to himself. Sarah explained that Luna was the last of the litter still on site. The others had already been transferred to buyers. She had taken Luna after overhearing a call about a private security contract in another state, one with a documented history of excessive force allegations. "If I reported him directly, he'd know it was me," she said. "So I left first." She did not say she was brave. She did not claim heroism. She spoke like someone who had chosen between 2 harms and selected the one she could live with. Daniel leaned back slightly. "You understand that on paper, it looks like theft." "Yes," she replied, meeting his gaze without flinching. "On paper it does." The afternoon light shifted toward gray. Rex rose from his position near the stove and moved toward the front window, ears forward. Daniel stood and joined him. At the far end of the dirt access road, beyond the last bend where cottonwoods lined the property, a gray pickup truck sat idling. It did not advance. It did not retreat. It simply waited. Sarah stepped beside him, color draining subtly from her face. "That's one of ours," she said. "Facility vehicle." Daniel narrowed his eyes. Even from this distance, he could make out the faint black emblem on the driver's door, a stylized shield enclosing the outline of a German shepherd's head. He had seen that logo before, not in town, not on a billboard. In a briefing tent 8 years ago, projected beside contract documentation listing subcontractors supporting his unit's deployment. Caldwell Protection had supplied the canine team for that operation. The truck remained motionless, engine faintly visible in the cold air.
Daniel felt something old and unhealed stir beneath his ribs. He did not look at Sarah when he spoke. "Small world," he murmured. Outside, the pickup's headlights flickered once before going dark, as if acknowledging they had been seen.
By the third morning, the road beyond the ranch had been cleared into two narrow gray lanes cut through walls of snow. The world looked passable again, though the cold had not softened. Daniel noticed the change first in the distant hum of passing trucks on Highway 191, a low vibration returning to the air like circulation in a numb limb. Inside the cabin, Sarah had begun moving with more confidence, though tension still lived in the way her shoulders stayed slightly raised, as if bracing for impact. Luna followed her closely now, clumsy but increasingly bold, while Rex observed the puppy with a patience that felt almost paternal. The sound of tires on gravel reached them shortly after noon. Not the uncertain crunch of a lost driver, but a controlled approach, steady, deliberate. Daniel stepped onto the porch before the engine cut. The gray pickup from the previous afternoon rolled to a stop just outside the ranch gate. It did not attempt to cross the boundary. The driver's door opened slowly. Mark Caldwell stepped out as if he owned the air he occupied. He was tall, just over 6 feet, with a thick build that had once been athletic and had settled into authority rather than softness. His hair was steel gray at the temples, darker at the crown, cut close in a style that suggested discipline rather than vanity. A neatly trimmed beard followed the sharp angles of his jaw. His face bore faint lines, not from laughter, but from long exposure to decision-making without hesitation. His eyes were pale blue, almost translucent, and held the steady focus of someone accustomed to being obeyed. He wore a charcoal wool coat over a dark button-down shirt, boots polished despite the mud at the gate. He did not hurry. He did not smile broadly. He simply assessed. Sarah appeared in the doorway behind Daniel, her breath caught audibly. Even from a distance, her posture shifted, spine straightening, chin lifting, not in confidence, but in resistance. Luna pressed against her leg, sensing the change in her pulse. Rex stepped forward to Daniel's side, ears alert but body controlled. Mark stopped at the closed gate, maintaining the boundary with almost theatrical precision. "Mr. Hayes," he called, voice even and resonant, the tone of a man who had spoken in boardrooms and briefing rooms alike. "I believe you have something that belongs to my company." Daniel did not invite him closer. "You can speak from there." Mark nodded once, as if approving the firmness. He withdrew a manila envelope from his coat pocket and held it up. "Formal notice of property reclamation. Civil matter. No need for drama." He slid the envelope through the metal slats of the gate without stepping onto the property. Daniel opened it slowly. The document inside was professionally drafted, citing breach of employment contract, unlawful removal of proprietary assets, and intent to pursue civil litigation if the asset, specifically identified as a female German Shepherd puppy registered under Caldwell protection and canine training, was not returned within 48 hours. The language was clean, controlled, and designed to intimidate without overt threat. "You know she's not equipment," Sarah said before Daniel could respond. Her voice was steady, though her hands trembled faintly at her sides. Mark's gaze shifted to her. For a moment, something softer flickered. Not warmth, but recognition. "You signed an agreement," he replied. "You were compensated. That animal represents significant investment. Emotional attachment does not alter contract law." Daniel studied him carefully. "You could have called first." Mark allowed a faint exhale that might have been amusement. "I did." She didn't answer. There was no raised voice, no aggression. That, Daniel realized, was intentional. Mark understood optics. He knew how to appear measured, reasonable. "Return the dog," Mark continued, "and this ends cleanly. Refuse, and I file suit and request law enforcement support for recovery. I would prefer efficiency." Sarah stepped forward despite herself. "Efficiency?"
she repeated quietly. Like editing training logs? The smallest tightening appeared at the corner of Mark's eyes. It vanished just as quickly. Be careful, he said, not loudly, but with weight. Daniel spoke before the exchange could escalate. You've delivered your notice. That's enough. This is private property. Mark looked at him fully then, eyes narrowing slightly as memory aligned. We've met, he said. Not a question, a statement. Different climate, different uniforms. Daniel did not answer. Mark's gaze sharpened. Small world, Marine. The words settled between them like frost. There was no overt hostility in Mark's tone, only acknowledgement of history, of shared systems, of past collaboration. He held Daniel's stare a fraction longer than politeness required, then stepped back toward his truck. I'll expect compliance, he said. 48 hours. He paused, glancing once more toward Sarah. Contracts exist for a reason. The engine turned over smoothly.
The truck reversed without hurry and disappeared down the road. Silence lingered after the sound faded. Sarah exhaled shakily. Daniel remained still until Rex's posture relaxed slightly, signaling the immediate threat had passed. He folded the document and walked back into the cabin without comment. Inside, he set the envelope on the table and moved toward a metal filing cabinet tucked beside a bookshelf. It had not been opened in years. He unlocked it with a key kept on a chain near the door. The drawer slid open with a dry metallic rasp. Inside were deployment records, after-action reports, briefing summaries, documents he had never quite found the courage to discard. He located the file marked with the date of the operation 8 years earlier. Desert terrain, urban edge, contracted canine support listed under subcontractor, Caldwell Protection. He scanned the technical appendix. Detection reliability, 98.7% under variable stress conditions. Endurance metrics, above standard threshold. He remembered the briefing officer emphasizing those numbers, the confidence they inspired. Daniel turned the page. A handwritten notation in the margin caught his eye, his own handwriting, tight and slanted. Dog fatigued sooner than reported. He flipped further. Internal memo attached weeks later. Revised metrics not submitted in initial contract package. He felt the old pressure behind his sternum. Not grief exactly, but recalibration. If the reported capabilities had been inflated, then the operational plan had rested on compromised data. The failure might not have been tactical error alone. Behind him, Sarah stood quietly, watching his expression change from guarded neutrality to something more focused, more deliberate. Daniel closed the file slowly. Outside, the wind shifted again, carrying with it the faint echo of a truck engine long gone. The afternoon light thinned into a brittle gold that made everything look harder than it was. Inside the cabin, Daniel sat alone at the oak table, the old deployment file spread open in front of him. The paper had yellowed slightly at the edges, creased from being opened and closed over the years, as if he could revise memory by rereading it. Outside, Rex lay on the porch, chin resting on his paws, watching the horizon with the steady vigilance of a dog who had learned that calm did not mean safe. Sarah moved quietly near the stove, heating water, her tall frame still narrow and slightly guarded even in borrowed wool layers. Luna slept at Rex's side earlier, but now wandered inside, exploring the corners of the room with clumsy confidence, unaware that contracts and accusations were shaping her future. Daniel's eyes lingered on the after-action report. 8 years ago, in a dust-blown compound halfway across the world, he had trusted a canine detection rating that promised near-perfect reliability under stress. 2 Marines under his command had entered a structure marked cleared. The explosion that followed had not been cinematic. It had been abrupt, ugly, and silent in the seconds after. Daniel remembered pulling debris with hands that shook only later. He had carried the weight of that failure as tactical misjudgment. Now, reading the technical appendix again, He saw the margin note in his own handwriting, questioning fatigue thresholds. Beneath it, attached weeks after the operation, was a revised internal assessment, never forwarded to Field Command, lowering the detection accuracy under extended exposure. The numbers had been better on paper than in practice. He had believed in data. Data had failed. Behind him, Sarah spoke softly. "You think he inflated the numbers?" It wasn't a question. Daniel closed the folder halfway, not hiding it but not offering it either. "I think someone wanted the contract to look stronger than it was." Sarah stepped closer to the table. In the fading light, her features appeared sharper, the faint freckles across her nose contrasting with skin still recovering from windburn. She reached into her backpack and withdrew a slim black flash drive and a folded stack of printed pages. "I copied internal emails before I left," she said. "Performance reports before they were edited, and correspondence about cost adjustments after deployment reviews." Her voice did not tremble now. It carried something steadier, resolve born from disillusionment. "I didn't just take Luna. I planned to report him." Daniel studied her face, searching for exaggeration. He found none. "You understand what that means," he said. "If you're right, it's bigger than a civil dispute." "I know." She met his gaze without flinching. "That's why he came himself." The sound of tires on gravel cut through the quiet. Not one vehicle this time, but two. Rex rose instantly, body rigid, ears high. Daniel moved to the window and saw a county sheriff's SUV pulling up near the gate. A second cruiser idled behind it. The emblem on the door read Gallatin County Sheriff. Sarah's shoulders tightened, but she did not retreat. "He filed something," she murmured. Daniel stepped onto the porch before the deputies reached the fence. The first to approach was a man in his late 30s, average height but solidly built, wearing a tan uniform jacket zipped against the cold. His name tag read Deputy Aaron Cole. Cole had a broad face weathered by Montana winters, short brown hair beneath his hat, and a trimmed mustache that gave him a slightly old-fashioned look. His eyes were direct, but not unkind. He carried himself like a man who preferred clarity over confrontation. "Afternoon, Mr. Hayes," Cole said evenly. "We received a complaint regarding possession of company property belonging to Caldwell Protection." Daniel nodded. "You're welcome to speak from there. No one's crossed the gate." Cole glanced briefly toward Sarah behind Daniel, then back at him. "At this time, it's listed as a civil matter. No warrant has been issued. We're conducting a welfare check and advising both parties to resolve it through proper channels." A second deputy remained by the vehicle, younger, clean-shaven, watching but not intervening. The interaction was procedural, controlled. Daniel kept his posture open, hands visible. He answered questions directly. Sarah confirmed her identity and stated she was not in danger and had left her previous employment voluntarily. Deputy Cole exhaled slowly, the cold air fogging between them. "Without a court order, we're not seizing anything," he said. "But if Caldwell files for one and a judge signs it, we'll be back." "Understood," Daniel replied. Cole's gaze flicked briefly to Rex, who stood motionless at Daniel's side. "Keep things calm," he added. "No reason to escalate." The deputies returned to their vehicles and drove off, leaving the ranch once more in silence. Sarah released a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. "He's pushing pressure," she said quietly. "He wants you to decide I'm not worth it." Daniel did not answer immediately. He walked back inside, set the old file beside Sarah's stack of documents, and stood for a long moment between two versions of truth. The past that had already cost him, and the present that threatened to complicate his hard-earned quiet. He could return Luna, let the legal process consume Sarah without his involvement, and retreat to isolation. Or he could step forward into a conflict that did not belong to him, except perhaps it did. Dusk settled quickly. Sarah went outside briefly to retrieve something from her car. Daniel noticed Rex's attention shift, not toward the road, but toward the vehicle itself. The dog circled the sedan once, nose low, then paused near the rear wheel well. His ears angled back in concentration. He emitted a low, questioning rumble. Daniel crouched beside him. Under the chassis, near the axle, a small, black, magnetic device clung to the metal frame. A GPS tracker. He looked up at Sarah, who had gone pale but not surprised. "They've been following you," he said evenly. The wind rose again, carrying with it the faint hum of distant traffic and something colder beneath it, the realization that this was no longer just about ownership. It was about surveillance. Night settled without ceremony, the kind of Montana cold that turned sound brittle and stretched silence thin across the fields. Inside the cabin, the wood stove pulsed a low orange glow against rough timber walls. Sarah sat at the table with the flash drive in front of her, fingers resting lightly over it, as though contact alone steadied her resolve. In lamplight, her features appeared softer, but not fragile. Her tall, lean frame still carried that restrained tension, shoulders drawn back as if she refused to collapse inward again. Her ash-blonde hair, freshly tied back, exposed the faint freckles across her nose and the determined set of her jaw. Luna dozed beside her chair, growing stronger each day, paws twitching in dreams. Rex lay nearer the door, eyes half-lidded but listening. "They tracked me from the moment I left," Sarah said quietly. "He didn't need to chase. He just waited." Her voice held no hysteria, only calculation. She had spent months learning to read power dynamics at Caldwell's facility. She knew how Mark Caldwell moved, never impulsively, always with leverage. Daniel stood by the window, looking toward the dark road beyond the gate. His posture was straight, shoulders squared, not from pride but from habit. He had learned that decisive posture could anchor a room. "You have a plan," he said. She nodded once. "There's an attorney in town, Rachel Kim. She handled a labor dispute for one of the trainers last year." A faint flicker of respect crossed her face at the memory. "She doesn't scare easily." Daniel said nothing. He understood what Sarah was doing. She was preparing to remove him from the equation. Around midnight, after Daniel had banked the fire and Rex had shifted closer to the door, Sarah moved quietly. She packed her backpack with the printed emails and the flash drive, wrapped Luna in a thick blanket, and stepped outside. The cold seized her breath immediately. Her car engine started with a reluctant grind before settling into a steady hum. She did not look back at the cabin. Daniel heard the engine. He did not run outside. Instead, he waited 3 seconds, long enough to confirm direction, then checked the small security monitor mounted near the hallway. The ranch gate camera showed Sarah's sedan rolling onto the snow-lined road. Rex was already standing beside him. Daniel exhaled slowly. He did not move in anger. He moved with method. First, he called 911. His voice remained level. "This is Daniel Hayes on County Road 14. I've located an unauthorized GPS tracking device attached to a civilian vehicle. Possible stalking related to a pending civil dispute. The vehicle is currently en route toward town. I'm following at a distance." He provided the coordinates from the device he had removed earlier and placed in his truck. The dispatcher acknowledged and said deputies were alerted. Only then did Daniel grab his coat and keys. Rex leapt into the passenger seat without command. The road toward Bozeman wound along frozen pasture land and sparse cottonwoods. Daniel kept several car lengths behind Sarah's sedan, headlights dimmed. The tracker's blinking light on his dashboard confirmed movement. He watched not just her tail lights, but the reflections in his mirrors, scanning for additional vehicles. The habit of checking angles had never left him. Sarah drove with rigid focus, hands tight on the steering wheel. The decision to leave had not been reckless. It had been protective. She would not let Daniel risk federal investigation or retaliatory lawsuits on her behalf. She had seen what Caldwell did to people who interfered. She would take the documents directly to Rachel Kim, place them into legal hands beyond Caldwell's reach. The town lights shimmered faintly ahead, but instead of continuing toward Main Street, The blinking tracker signal on Daniel's dashboard veered sharply left. His brow furrowed. Sarah's car followed that turn. County Road 14 narrowed into an older service route that led toward the Gallatin River. Daniel recognized it instantly. 8 years earlier, during pre-deployment evaluation exercises, Caldwell had rented property near the old wooden bridge spanning that river. Daniel remembered watching young dogs run scent drills along the icy banks while Caldwell lectured officers about endurance metrics. It had been a demonstration of capability, confidence packaged as proof. Now, Sarah's sedan slowed near that same bridge. Daniel's grip tightened slightly on the steering wheel. "Why here?" he murmured. Ahead, he saw a second vehicle parked near the riverbank. Its silhouette matched Caldwell's gray pickup. Sarah had stopped. Daniel killed his headlights and pulled off at a distance, heart rate steady but elevated. He dialed 911 again. "Subject has diverted to Gallatin Wooden Bridge Access Road. Possible confrontation." The dispatcher confirmed units were inbound. Through the windshield, Daniel watched as Sarah stepped out of her car, Luna bundled in her arms. Mark Caldwell emerged from his truck, coat collar turned up against the cold. Even from this distance, Daniel could read the calm in Caldwell's posture, the way he stood centered, hands visible, projecting reason. Two younger men remained inside the pickup, shadows behind glass. Daniel exited his truck, Rex stepping down beside him, muscles coiled but disciplined. The air near the river was sharper, the ice cracking softly along the edges of dark water. Sarah stood facing Caldwell, shoulders squared despite the tremor in her breath. "You didn't need to come here," Caldwell's voice carried over the frozen expanse, smooth and controlled. "We could have resolved this quietly." "I'm done resolving quietly," Sarah replied. Her tone was steady now, fear replaced by something firmer. Daniel walked forward, boots crunching on frost. Caldwell turned his head slightly, recognition flashing in his pale eyes. "Still chasing ghosts, Marine?" Caldwell said. Daniel did not answer that. He glanced once at the bridge, the same structure where demonstration drills had once convinced him of numbers he now doubted. The memory aligned with the present like two halves of a single miscalculation. The blinking light on the tracking device in Daniel's pocket pulsed again, confirming location. He understood then. The tracker had not just followed Sarah, it had guided her, back to ground Caldwell controlled, back to familiar territory where leverage felt stronger. Daniel looked from the bridge to Caldwell and said evenly, "You picked the wrong memory." Behind him, distant sirens began to thread through the night air, faint but growing. The Gallatin River moved beneath the wooden bridge in dark, fractured sheets of ice, the current pushing slow and relentless under frozen edges. Frost clung to the railings like bone dust. The night felt suspended, too still for what was about to unfold. Sarah stood near the midpoint of the clearing before the bridge, Luna bundled tightly against her chest inside a wool blanket. In the thin spill of headlights, her tall frame looked almost fragile, but the way she planted her boots in the snow revealed something else: refusal. Her ash-blonde hair was tied back again, strands loose against her temples, cheeks flushed from cold but not from panic. Her gray-blue eyes were steady now. She was afraid, yes, but she was no longer running. Mark Caldwell leaned casually against the hood of his gray pickup, hands resting flat against the metal, as though conducting a negotiation rather than an ambush. His wool coat remained buttoned, collar turned up. Even in freezing air, he appeared composed, shoulders squared, posture controlled. To his right stood one of his employees, a broad man in his early 30s with a shaved head and heavy jaw, wearing a black tactical jacket unzipped at the collar. His name was Derek Shaw, a former private security contractor whose file Sarah had once seen in the office. Disciplinary notes about temper issues but high physical proficiency ratings. Derek's arms were crossed, stance wide, the kind of man who solved tension with force before language. The second employee remained closer to the truck, slimmer, younger, watchful but uncertain. "You didn't need to escalate this," Mark said, his voice smooth as river ice. "You could have handed over the property and saved yourself this trouble." "It's not property," Sarah answered. Her grip tightened slightly around Luna, who stirred but did not whimper. The puppy sensed atmosphere but trusted proximity. Mark exhaled lightly. "Emotion does not override contract law. The dog is registered to Caldwell Protection. The documents you've taken are company materials." His gaze sharpened. "You're compounding your liability." Before Sarah could respond, another pair of headlights approached slowly from behind. Daniel's truck rolled into view, stopping at a calculated distance. He stepped out with deliberate calm, coat collar raised against the wind. Rex followed, descending from the passenger seat without command. Daniel's posture was not aggressive, but it was immovable, feet planted shoulder-width apart, hands visible at his sides. He had learned that visible hands diffused more situations than raised fists. "Evening, Caldwell," Daniel said evenly. Mark turned, faint recognition passing over his face like a shadow. "You should have stayed out of it," he replied. Daniel did not step closer. "I've already notified the sheriff's office about the tracker on her vehicle. They're on their way." A flicker, just slight, crossed Mark's expression. Derek shifted beside him, shoulders tightening. "This doesn't concern you," Derek muttered, stepping forward a pace. His movements carried restless energy, coiled impatience. His hand hovered near his waistband. Rex's ears snapped forward instantly. A low growl vibrated through his chest, controlled but unmistakable. He moved half a step ahead of Daniel and Sarah, positioning himself diagonally between them and Derek. His thick black and tan coat bristled subtly along the spine, amber eyes locked with predatory clarity. He did not bark. He did not lunge. He simply warned. Derek's temper snapped faster than Mark anticipated. In a sharp, reactive motion, he pulled a handgun from beneath his jacket, the muzzle angling uncertainly between Daniel and Sarah. The action was impulsive rather than tactical. His grip was tight but not steady. Everything slowed. Daniel did not reach for a weapon. He did not carry one. Instead, he raised one hand calmly. "You don't want to do that," he said, voice steady, unhurried. His eyes never left Derek's. Rex's growl deepened, not louder but lower, a vibration that communicated inevitability. Luna whimpered once, pressing against Sarah's chest. Mark's jaw tightened. "Put it away," he ordered sharply. Derek hesitated, breath fogging heavily in the cold air. The distant wail of sirens began to thread through the night, faint at first, then unmistakable. Blue and red lights flickered against the frost-coated trees. Derek lowered the gun half an inch too slowly. 2 Gallatin County Sheriff vehicles arrived in controlled formation, tires crunching over ice. Deputy Aaron Cole stepped out first, posture firm, hand resting near his holster but not drawing. Behind him emerged another figure Daniel had not seen before. A tall woman in a dark winter coat over business attire, badge clipped at her belt instead of pinned to her chest. Her hair was black, pulled into a tight bun, her features sharp and analytical. This was Investigator Lena Morales, county-level investigative liaison with federal coordination experience. Her presence shifted the atmosphere immediately. She was not patrol. She was inquiry. "Drop it," Cole commanded evenly. Derek complied at last, placing the handgun into the snow. He was restrained quickly without resistance. Mark's composure returned, like a mask sliding back into place. "This is a misunderstanding," he began smoothly. Morales stepped forward, eyes steady and unreadable. "We'll determine that," she said. Her voice was low but carried authority sharpened by experience. There was no visible irritation in her expression, only calculation. Daniel remained silent as deputies separated parties. Sarah handed over the flash drive and printed documents, her fingers cold but unwavering. Morales accepted them carefully, glancing briefly at Sarah's face as if measuring credibility through posture rather than words. "We've had previous complaints," Morales said quietly to Daniel, while deputies placed Derek into the cruiser.
Unrelated contracts, irregular documentation. She studied Caldwell across the clearing.
Tonight's report of unlawful tracking and coercion gives us leverage. Mark's jaw flexed. You're overreaching, he said. Morales did not look at him when she replied, You're detained pending investigation for unlawful surveillance and attempted intimidation. Caldwell's pale blue eyes met Daniel's one last time. The confidence remained, but something beneath it had shifted, calculation interrupted by consequence. As deputies escorted Caldwell toward the vehicle, Morales turned slightly toward Daniel. Her tone lowered, no longer official but informative. For what it's worth, she said, Caldwell's been on our radar for 3 months. Contract discrepancies. Federal auditors flagged numbers that didn't match operational reports. Daniel absorbed that without visible reaction. The cold air pressed against his lungs, sharp and clarifying. He had not stepped into this alone. Behind him, Sarah held Luna tighter, but her shoulders were no longer drawn upward. Rex stood calmly at Daniel's side, the tension in his body easing as the patrol lights reflected off the river's broken ice. The bridge, once a place of demonstration and inflated metrics, had become something else entirely, a point of exposure. And this time, the numbers would not be rewritten. Spring did not arrive dramatically in Bozeman. It edged in quietly, softening the snowbanks into slow, deliberate melt and turning the river from iron to motion. Weeks had passed since the night at the bridge. The air carried less bite now, though morning still began in frost. The ranch felt larger in thaw, fence posts emerging from snow like markers of endurance rather than isolation. Mark Caldwell had been formally charged pending investigation for unlawful surveillance and intimidation, and federal auditors had opened a broader review into contract discrepancies tied to Caldwell protection and canine training. The civil claim regarding the stolen property had been suspended as the investigation widened. Derek Shaw faced separate firearm charges after the confrontation at the bridge. The process was procedural and slow, but it moved forward. Sarah was no longer listed in county dispatch as a welfare concern. Officially, she was a witness in an active investigation. Unofficially, she was something else entirely. A woman learning how to stand still without feeling hunted. In the weeks since the bridge, she had remained at Daniel's ranch, not hidden, not sheltered, present. She rose early now, before Daniel most mornings, her tall frame no longer folded inward but carrying a quiet steadiness. Her ash-blonde hair was often braided loosely down her back, and color had returned fully to her freckled skin. The tightness around her eyes had eased. She still moved thoughtfully, but not defensively. Luna had grown quickly, legs lengthening, paws no longer disproportionate but powerful. Her sable coat had thickened, black saddle darkening against a copper underlayer. She shadowed Rex with devotion, studying his movements, mirroring his posture during patrol walks along the fence line. Rex, 7 years old and seasoned by service, tolerated her closeness with measured patience. He corrected gently when she overstepped, nudging her shoulder or stepping between her and a distraction. There was no jealousy in him, only assessment. Daniel sometimes watched them from the porch, seeing in their interaction something quieter than training, inheritance of discipline without force. That morning, the sky stretched clear and pale blue. Daniel was repairing a section of fence near the southern pasture when he saw Sarah walking toward him, boots steady and mud-softened ground. She carried no bag this time, no look of departure tension. Instead, she carried a folded envelope. "I spoke with Investigator Morales yesterday," she said when she reached him. Her voice was calm, neither urgent nor burdened. "Federal review confirmed document tampering. They'll likely pursue formal fraud charges." She paused, studying Daniel's face. "Rachel Kim is helping coordinate statements." Daniel nodded once. "Good." She handed him the envelope. Inside was a formal notice confirming suspension of civil claims against her pending outcome of the criminal investigation. The words were clean, precise. Closure did not arrive as relief. It arrived as confirmation. "You're clear," Daniel said, folding the paper. Sarah looked toward the barn, toward Luna and Rex resting in the shade near the porch. "I came to thank you," she said quietly. There was no dramatic inflection in her tone. Gratitude, yes, but not dependence. "You didn't have to get involved." Daniel set the fencing pliers aside. He studied her the way he studied structural lines before repairing them, checking for weakness, for shift. "I didn't," he replied. She waited for more, but he did not add to it. "I thought about leaving," she continued. "Going back into town, finding work somewhere else." Her jaw tightened briefly, not from fear, but from consideration. "But I realized something on that bridge." I wasn't trying to escape him anymore. I was trying to escape myself. Daniel's brow furrowed slightly, not in confusion, but in recognition. "I kept running because I believed staying meant being trapped," she said. "But staying can mean building." The wind moved gently through the pasture grass. Luna bounded toward them suddenly, tail high, mud splashing against her legs. Rex followed at a slower pace, controlled but attentive. Luna stopped between Daniel and Sarah, looking up with bright, amber-brown eyes that had lost none of their trust. Daniel rested a hand on Rex's broad head. The dog leaned slightly into the touch, a weight that grounded more than any spoken reassurance. Sarah looked back toward the cabin. "I won't stay if you're offering out of obligation," she said plainly. Daniel met her gaze. His face, angular and marked by years that had carved restraint into habit, showed no flourish of emotion, only clarity. Ranch always needs steady hands. There was no invitation wrapped in romance, no declaration disguised as gratitude, just fact. Sarah held his gaze for a long moment, searching for something that wasn't there. Dependency, perhaps. She found none. What she found instead was space. She nodded once. "Then I'll stay." Not because she had been rescued, not because she owed him survival, but because she no longer needed to measure distance in miles run. Later that morning, Daniel returned to the fence line while Sarah carried feed buckets toward the barn. Luna followed her eagerly. Rex resumed his post on the porch, watching both with quiet assurance. The ranch did not look transformed. The fences still required repair. The wind still cut through open ground. Daniel had not softened into a different man. He had simply stopped isolating his strength from consequence. As Sarah moved across the yard, sunlight caught in her hair, revealing subtle gold beneath ash tones. Her stride was unhurried. For the first time since she had fled the facility, she walked without scanning the horizon. Rex stretched out fully on the wooden porch, massive paws extended, Luna curling beside him. The older dog's presence was not possessive, only anchoring. Daniel paused near the pasture and glanced back toward the house, not to check for threat, but to confirm presence. The river beyond the fields moved freely now. Ice surrendered to current. Nothing in the landscape announced resolution. There was no music in the air, no cinematic stillness, only ordinary motion. And in that ordinariness, something had shifted permanently. Sarah had stayed. Daniel had not stood aside. The ranch did not feel smaller with two more lives in it. It felt inhabited. Sometimes miracles do not arrive as thunder or parted skies. Sometimes they come as a door that opens in the cold, a loyal dog that refuses to move, or a weary heart that chooses not to run anymore. God often works quietly, placing people in each other's paths at the exact moment strength is needed. In our daily lives, we pray for signs, yet the answer may already be in the kindness we offer or receive. If this story touched you, share it with someone who needs hope. Tell us where you're watching from in the comments, and subscribe for more stories of faith and second chances. May God bless you, protect your family, and guide your steps today and always.